And as soon as my mother moved us up to New York, I found myself getting very lost very quickly. And frankly, hurting a lot of people who loved me so I could impress people that could care less about me. I started picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school, and frankly, having teachers who told me that it really didn't matter because the classroom went smoother when I wasn't there. And the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists was when I was 11 years old. But how I found out when I was 13 years old that when my mom makes threats that she's not playing, and eventually she ended up sending me away to a military school, which I hated every minute of it when I first showed up. I literally ran away 5 times in the first 4 days. The last time I tried to run away was when they found me in the woods at 1:30 in the morning, and they found me crying with a map that they had given me earlier in the day, but then the map was fake. And I remember when they brought me back to campus, we're in the middle of something called plebe system, where there's no outside communication, no phone calls, radios, television, nothing. It's a chance you're either going to succeed as a team or you will fail as a team, and it is completely your choice. And so they brought me back to campus, but they said, we're going to make an exception for you, and we'll give you 1 phone call. And the phone call that I made was to my mom. And now my mom wasn't expecting to hear from me for about 8 weeks, and now here it was on day 4 at 1 o'clock in the morning, she got a phone call. And so she's freaking out. I'm like, Mommy, I'm okay. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, but I'm really ready to come home. You know, do you need directions on how to get here tomorrow morning? And I started going this whole litany of things that she needed to do to make my life easier. And then she stopped me. And she said, too many people have sacrificed in order for you to be there. And too many people are rooting for you. And you've got to understand it is not all about you. And I listened to her talk, and after 5 minutes, they told me my time was up. They hung up the phone, they sent me back up to my room, and I'd be lying if I said anything changed that night, because it did not. Because I went to bed that night just as angry as I went to bed the night before, and I woke up the next morning even angrier. But eventually, I began to understand what she was talking about. And this larger interconnectedness that we have as a bigger society. But then in this article, they're talking a little bit about how I ended up finishing high school there, and I joined the Army right out of high school. I went to community college. After that was at Johns Hopkins, and when I was a senior at Johns Hopkins was when I got this scholarship. But at the same time, when the Baltimore Sun was writing about me getting this Rhodes Scholarship, they were also writing about 4 guys who walked into a jewelry store and in a botched robbery ended up murdering an off-duty police officer. And this off-duty police officer that they murdered was a 13-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Force. He was a 3-time recipient of Police Officer of the Year. He was also a father of 5 who just had triplets. And the reason he was working that day was because it was his day off from the police force, and he took on a second job as a security guard to make extra money for his family. And I found out through articles, and I found out through newspapers, and I found out through wanted posters that one of the people that the police were looking for that was eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced was this guy whose name was also Wes Moore. And the more I learned about him, the more I learned about this tragedy, the more I learned about the crime, the more I learned how much more we had in common than just our names. And so I knew there were questions I wanted to ask, and I knew Wes was the only one that could answer them. So one day I just decided to write him a note. And even though I wasn't really expecting to hear back from him, the letter that I did get back from him a month later, it wasn't what I expected. And the letter that I did receive from him was one of the more interesting and articulate letters that I've ever received in my life, and it only led to more questions. And that then became the genesis and the idea. Because I now have known Wes for just about 10 years, because that one letter turned to dozens of letters, those dozens of letters turned into dozens of visits, and eventually those conversations led to what eventually became the other Wes Moore, and then discovering Wes Moore. And with that book, I wanted to try to understand that line between success and failure, and in many ways how thin that line can really be. And where the most important conversation then became not just about the decisions that we make, but just as important as the decisions that we make, and tantamount to that, is who are the people that we have in our lives who help us to make those decisions.